Welcome back to Short Times. Today, we're excited to introduce you to the magical world of Upon the Magic Roads. This movie follows the journey of Foal and John as they embark on a quest filled with danger, excitement. One night, a glowing white horse runs through the field, leaving a trail of light in its wake. The next morning, a man calls his children over to show them the destroyed wheat field. One of the children, named John, happens to catch a hedgehog on his way to see the damage. Upon arriving, the man places John in charge of guarding the field at night. While on night watch duty, John hears the sound of a horse neighing and climbs the watchtower to investigate. In the midst of a heavy fog, he spots a huge white horse and tries to capture it with a rope. However, the horse is too quick and flees, dragging John along for the ride. Despite the danger, John declares that he will sell the horse at the town market. After a wild chase, the horse eventually crashes and falls into a swamp, where it begins to drown. John quickly comes to its rescue and uses a wheat mill to save it. The horse is so grateful that it sheds a tear, and John is deeply moved by the gesture. He sets the horse free, but only after making it promise never to return and cause any more damage to the wheat field. John is worried when he sees the damage done to the wheat field and realizes he will be punished the next day. So, he sleeps in the stable for the night. However, when he wakes up the next morning, he is greeted by two majestic black horses that are fit for royalty. As he is about to grab a pitchfork to defend himself from the strange voice he hears in the background, he sees that it is actually a small horse. He tries to attack it, but his efforts are reflected back at him. The little horse, whom John later names Foal, reveals that the white horse John encountered the night before is its mother and that the black horses are a gift from her. Foal is also there to guide John. Just then, John's father sees the ruined wheat field and starts to shout. In response, Foal quickly carries John on its back and runs away from the scene at an incredible speed. John and Foal set off on a magical and exciting journey, facing challenges and learning important lessons along the way. John tells Foal about his plan to sell the horses at the town market. Foal, sensing danger, whistles loudly to call the horses before John's family can capture them. Together, John and Foal travel to the town market, where everyone tries to negotiate a price with John for the horses. Foal leads John to the palace, where John admires the king and thinks he must be very important and busy. However, when they enter the king's chambers, they see that the king is actually occupied with killing a mosquito, and the courtiers are applauding him. After killing the mosquito, the king gets dressed and begins to survey the town from his palace. It is then that he notices John with the two black horses, which he recognizes as belonging to the royal family. This sets the stage for an exciting and unpredictable encounter between John and the king. As everyone tries to offer John a price for the horses, the king and his courtiers arrive to take them back, thinking they have come from the royal palace. John, caught up in his admiration for the king, hands the horses over to them without demanding payment. After they leave, Foal reminds John about the payment he forgot to collect. Foal then whistles again, and the horses come running back, crashing into the king and sending him flying into a bag of flour in the process. John cannot help but laugh at the sight of the king covered in flour. Thankfully, the penalty for mocking the king used to be execution, but it has been replaced by a fine. John is relieved to learn that he will not face serious consequences for his actions. Nevertheless, he has learned an important lesson about the importance of always following through on his agreements and collecting payment for his goods. John requests 2 silver hats as payment for the horses, but a courtier reminds the king that the horses will keep running back to John. The king then offers John a job at the palace, which John accepts. That night, the king dreams of John dancing as he is beheaded, causing his hatred for John to grow. The following morning, John gains popularity among the people. One of the courtiers suggests to the king that he send John on a mission to find the mythical Firebird. If John fails to find it, he will face execution. The king agrees, seeing this as an opportunity to get rid of John for good. The mission to find the Firebird sets the stage for further adventures and challenges for John as he sets out to prove his worth. Foal warns John of the difficulties in finding the Firebird, but John remains determined. They travel to the forest to collect dream nuts to feed the Firebird, but Foal stops John from eating them as they will only make him fall asleep. Eventually, they reach an oasis in the desert where the Firebird resides. They find a warning sign about the presence of dangerous liquid sand, and John throws the dream nuts. After a while, the Firebird emerges and begins feeding on the nuts, which start to intoxicate it. Foal falls asleep, telling John to wake him up when the Firebird falls asleep. However, the Firebird notices them and starts to attack, leading to a fierce battle that results in massive destruction to the landscape. Finally, the Firebird falls asleep and John captures it. The following morning, the Firebird is weak and sheds a tear of fire that ruins John's boot. John, feeling pity for the bird, frees it and watches as it flies away, leaving a feather for John. John finally learns how Foal calls the animals with his whistle. John and Foal eventually return to the kingdom after capturing the Firebird, despite Foal's warning about the consequences of failure. However, when they get back, the king orders their execution for failing to deliver the Firebird. John, determined to prove himself, decides to use the Firebird's feather as evidence of his success. However, the feather doesn't burn anymore, and it seems as though John's efforts were in vain. Just as the execution is about to take place, the feather suddenly begins to burn and the Firebird appears, shining its bright light over the kingdom. The people rejoice, and the king is forced to reward John for his bravery and success. A feast is declared in John's honor, and the kingdom is filled with happiness and celebration. As John prepares to depart from the kingdom, the people bid him farewell. However, Foal expresses his concern about John's upcoming journey, as the heavenly kingdom is guarded by 3 powerful heroes that he fears John will not be able to defeat. Despite Foal's warnings, John persists in his quest. Along the way, Foal continues to try to discourage John, but he remains determined. When they reach the entrance to the Ice Palace, they are greeted not by heroes, but by a barrier that prevents them from entering. John, determined to reach the Virgin Empress, uses the Firebird's feather to break through the barrier, which releases a huge wave of water that turns to ice. The ice washes Foal down a cliff, trapping him in a ball of ice, while John's boot becomes ice to the ground. Undeterred, John removes his leg from the boot and continues on his journey into the Ice Palace, guided by the Firebird's feather towards the Virgin Empress. As John meets the Empress, he explains that he has been sent by his king as a matchmaker. In the process of helping her down from her ice bed, she falls onto John and begins to fall in love with him. To test John's bravery, the Empress jumps off a cliff and waits to see if John will follow. To her surprise, John takes the jump and even punctures her gown while trying to save her. Foal, who has been keeping his wings hidden, finally uses them to save both John and the Empress. The group decides to camp for the night before continuing their journey. During the night, Foal suggests that John leave the Empress behind and flee, but John refuses and instead shows his commitment by covering the Empress with his cloth while admiring her and sleeping in the cold. The Empress, who had been eavesdropping on the conversation, is moved by John's devotion. The next morning, John and the Empress arrived at the kingdom, and the people were filled with joy and celebrated John's arrival. The ladies were also admiring him and couldn't help but lust after him. On the other hand, the king and his courtiers were taken aback by the fact that John had survived the mission. This only fueled the king's hatred towards John. Despite this, the king was obligated to reward John once again. That night, John and Foal had a deep conversation about John's love for the Virgin Empress. In an attempt to express his feelings, John decided to get some flowers and deliver them to her that night. He climbed to her window and presented her with the flowers. The Empress was pleased to see them, and John introduced himself to her. Unfortunately, the courtiers entered her room with different types of clothing for her to choose from for the ball. She was about to push John down but decided to wear a male cloth instead and go to the ball to meet the king. The Virgin Empress, who was expecting the king to be young and agile, ends up mistaking the real king for other courtiers. This leads to a tense situation when the king reveals himself, but the Empress does not believe him until the guards wear a garment of gold on him. The Empress then apologizes for her mistake and accepts the king's hand. John, who is in love with the Virgin Empress, expresses his jealousy towards Foal about the king's plans to marry her. However, the Empress opposes the marriage because she cannot wed without her grandmother's lost ring that is said to be at the bottom of the sea. John, seeing an opportunity to help the Empress, volunteers to find the ring, and the king agrees to his request. That night, as Foal thinks about John's strange actions, he notices the spirit of a whale flying in the sky. He then turns to the wind and inquires about the location of the ring. The wind informs him that the ring is inside the belly of a whale that has been captured and turned into an island. It even points the way to Foal. The next day, Foal and John set out on their journey. While they are flying, Foal tells John what the wind had told him the previous night. Suddenly, a group of birds flies into John's face, causing him to fall into the sea. There, he sees a whale that has been captured and chained up. Foal interprets the whale's language, saying that it is sorry for eating 100 ships in the past. John realizes that the whale only has to sneeze to break the chains. So, the two of them fly into the whale's nostrils, and Foal tickles its interior with the tip of his feathers, causing the whale to sneeze and break the chains, freeing the trapped ships. However, John forgets to retrieve the ring from the whale, but a crab eventually brings the ring to him. John and Foal return to the kingdom with the ring, and they decide to deliver it to the Virgin Empress by climbing up to her window. However, they are spotted by the guards and a courtier who is watching them through a scope. The courtier realizes that Foal can talk and calls him a demon. The guards force their way into the Empress's room to capture John. The commotion wakes up the king, who takes his gun and walks to his window where he sees Foal. In a moment of panic, the king shoots Foal, causing him to fall to the ground while John is captured. The town's messenger reads out John's crimes to the public. A small chick comes to the Empress's door and leads her to where Foal is lying. The Empress reveals to Foal that she told the king about the recipe for eternal youth, which involves boiling 3 large pots of water, ice, and milk at 3 p.m. the next day and bathing in them. Unfortunately, the courtiers plan to use John to test the recipe first. As the story reaches its climax, the Empress shares with Foal a critical piece of information that can save John's life. She explains that there is a way to cancel out the effects of the boiling mixture that John is about to be thrown into. By dropping her grandmother's ring, the firebird's feather, and the flower of life and death into the boiling water, ice, and milk respectively, the effects of the mixture will be neutralized. Foal, who has already been injured by the king, sets out to retrieve the flower. Despite being warned that whoever plucks the flower will die, he bravely plucks it and returns to the kingdom. With the help of the Empress, Foal successfully drops the flower into the boiling milk, and John emerges unscathed. The people, who had thought John was dead, are now overjoyed to see him alive and well. The king, who had been watching from the sidelines, tries to jump into the boiling mixture in an attempt to gain eternal youth. However, instead of being transformed, he is enveloped by a bubble and carried away into the sky. The people of the kingdom crown John as their new king, and he and the Empress are named king and queen. As the people celebrate, John and the Empress go in search of Foal, who has been waiting for death as the flower warned. But the Empress explains that the flower only warned of death to test the courage of the harvester. With this realization, Foal is relieved, and the three of them live happily ever after, with the kingdom rejoicing at their coronation. Upon the Magic Roads is a movie that will leave a lasting impression on you. With its thrilling action, heartwarming love story, and magical elements, this movie is a must-watch for anyone who loves a good adventure. So be sure to check it out, and let us know in the comments what you thought of the movie. Thanks for watching Short Times, and until next time, happy viewing.